right, welcome folks to the Penny Stamps lecture series. My name is Ashley Lucas and I am a professor in the theater and drama department as well as in the residential college at the University of Michigan. And I'm here today to have a conversation with Shaka Senghor, who is a remarkable writer, performer, producer. He has many, many creative talents, and he would have been speaking this week on the stage of the Michigan Theater as part of both the Penny Stamps lecture series and as the keynote talk for the 25th annual exhibition of art by Michigan prisoners through the Prison Creative Arts Project. So I am very sorry that we couldn't get you here in person today, Shaka, but I'm delighted that we get to talk to you at least online, and we hope very much that you'll be able to make it to campus in future to do the lecture that we had planned for you to do today. So thank you for joining us.
No, thank you so much for having me. I'm really disappointed that I couldn't make it out. I was really looking forward to coming home and seeing some of my former students and colleagues and just being back in Michigan. So unfortunately, we couldn't make it out, but we'll make the best of it.
It is unfortunate. And the reason for our unfortunate lack of physical presence together is, of course, the coronavirus pandemic, the COVID-19, which is ravaging the entire globe right now. And I wanted to ask you, before we got too deeply into your own story, which is a story that involves a lot of talk of incarceration and how that shaped your career as a writer and an artist. I'm wondering if you could say a few things about what you know is happening right now with people who are currently incarcerated during this really scary time of the pandemic.
Yeah, it's really one of the scariest parts for me is just thinking about my friends who are still incarcerated and understanding that environment. And I know that they've taken some measures to prevent people from coming inside, but it doesn't prevent officers from coming inside who could possibly be carriers of the virus. And that environment is very tough. You know, it's primarily closed in, and people don't have, access to real health care. You know, the doctors are limited in that environment. And so that's the scary thing. It's like the capacity. People who have got sick from the diseases sounds like they need respirators. And I just don't know if the hospitals have the bandwidth to accommodate that many men and women in prison. I mean, there's over 1,000 prisons in America, and it's over 2.3 million people incarcerated in various facilities, whether it's county jails or prisons. And so it's really scary times for those incarcerated, scary for their family. Everything in that environment is shared. So, whatever phones there are, usually in each unit, there's 3 to 4 phones per 100 or so, men, and that's just a lot of people sharing. And the bathrooms are typically communal in those environments, especially in the lower levels. And so, I just have a great deal of concern for the men and women on the inside, and hopefully governors throughout the country are taking the necessary precautions to protect them and make sure that they're passing out disinfectant and, creating space for them. I mean, they don't really have the option of what do they call it? Social distancing. They don't really have that option. A lot of times they're in cubicles that can be anywhere from 6 to 30 men or women, or they're occupying multiple bodied cells. So, it's a lot to be concerned about. But, our prayers and positive energy is being directed in that space. And, I'm talking to people who are working in criminal justice space to see what we can do to support.
Absolutely. And I know there have been a lot of petitions going to governors in both California, where you are, and Michigan, where I am, to request that they release folks who are in prison over the age of 70 and people with serious health problems to help them avoid the coronavirus. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a time for governors to be courageous and thoughtful and strategic in their thinking, but also the community as well, because even with people being released, they're still going to need support and, potentially hospice. There's a lot of elderly incarcerated women and men who need additional healthcare treatment. So those are things that people are trying to figure out. I had a friend reach out and just ask if I can tap into some of my friends who have, financial resources to possibly support them. So they're trying to rapidly build an infrastructure to help men and women getting released early if that happens. I know a lot of the county jails are letting people out, which is one of the things that just kind of, it kind of frustrates you because it's like, so these people have been in there in the first place
Hmm.
because they couldn't pay $500 bail or whatever the case may be, and clearly they're not a threat to the community. But hopefully, these moments teach people the importance of making logical and rational, thoughtful, and considerate decisions.
Absolutely. And I know that you and I, given our interests, could talk policy and what should happen with prison abolition or reform all day long. But I know that the folks who are watching the Stamps lecture series really want to hear about art, and you've got plenty to say about that as well. Could you tell us briefly how you got started as a writer and what writing means to you?
Yeah, well, my journey as a writer really kind of evolved over the years of my incarceration. I was incarcerated for a total of 19 years. I spent 7 of those years in solitary confinement, the longest stretch being 4.5 years. And I used to tell the story of like taking writing seriously while I was in solitary, but I realized I've been a writer for a long time. I would be in class and I would get done with my work relatively quickly, and then I would write these little funny stories and pass them around and disrupt the classroom in prison because I would
Mhm.
have guys chuckling in there at the little crazy stories I would write. But the first real story I wrote was actually for a prison newspaper, and one of the guys on my cell block at the time, he was the editor for the prison newspaper at the Michigan Reformatory called the Hilltop News, and he asked me to write an article, and I didn't even ask, I didn't even understand why he was asking me. And I asked him, I was like, why would you ask me to write something for a paper? I'm not a writer. And he was like, well, you seem smart. So I was like, all right, well, I'll see what I can do. And I ended up writing a story about learning of my sister's addiction to crack cocaine while I was on a visit in the visiting room with my family. And that article came out like a couple of months later, and just so many of the men in the prison came up to me and just thanked me for telling what they felt was like their personal story of having a loved one grappling with drug addiction. And then a few years later, probably about, man, probably about 14 or 15 years later, while I was in solitary confinement, I started journaling and just realized that, I needed questions to how I ended up in the solitary confinement cell. And through that journaling, I realized I never accomplished anything of substance. And so I challenged myself to write a book in 30 days. And so I wrote my first book. It was a work of fiction. And I thought that was great that I completed that in 30 days. Yeah, and that's actually my third book right there. And I started that in solitary confinement as well. So, I ended up writing a few books while I was in there. And then I went into a bout of depression after I finished my second one. And I started the one that you just showed, Crack. So that was the actual third novel that I wrote. And I remember getting about halfway through it, and I just got really depressed because I realized my dream, I discovered this dream and this talent in this environment where I couldn't give birth to it. And so I put that on the shelf and focused on getting out of solitary. And then once I got out of solitary, I finished writing that book and eventually published that book from prison in 2008, and then got sued by the Department of Corrections for the cost of my incarceration.
That's outrageous, but it happens to writers in prison all the time. Why would the Department of Corrections sue a writer for the cost of their incarceration? What's the logic behind that?
Well, their logic is that they thought I came into a lot of money. They didn't realize that I self-published and that I actually invested my own money to get the book done. And it's one of those things where our system just continues to figure out ways to take from people, and it's an old law that says that if you come into any kind of money over a certain amount, that the state has the right to take it to pay for your uh, room and board in the prisons. And so that was their logic. And when I got sued, I just remember feeling like it was so disappointing because I knew getting out of prison it was going to be very tough to find employment, and so I was creating a pathway for myself. And it was like as soon as I'm doing something positive, they try to take it away from me. And so just to be in that environment where you see so many people coming back and forth because they can't find employment, and then to have the state attempt to take your employable opportunity off the table, it was just one of those moments where I realized how dysfunctional our system is and how punitive it is, and how it really sets people up to fail. Unfortunately, I was able to navigate that. I knew a lot more about the law than they anticipated. And so I just kind of structured the deal in a way to where I made sure I didn't make any money personally, and that whatever money my company made, it wouldn't happen until I actually got out of prison. At that point, the lawsuit would no longer be binding.
Well, good for you for being smart enough to hang on to to your own book and whatever proceeds came of it. I really wanted to show the audience today a copy of your memoir, Righting My Wrongs, which is your best known book, but I am self-isolating at home because I may have been exposed to students who have the virus. So I have not gone back to campus to get the copy out of my office. Do you have a copy you can
I
show
do actually.
people?
I'm actually in my home office, so I actually have this, but I also have this. Wait, not this one. I have my first appearance in a Michigan Lit Review. So,
I was looking for that to show people too. So the Michigan Review of Prisoner Creative Writing is the literary journal produced by the Prison Creative Arts Project, or PCAP for short. And Shaka was in our very first, was it the first 2 volumes?
I think it was the first. Yeah, I think I was in the first 2. This is actually my dad's copy. See, he's like old school. He got his name on it. I need to get this back to him, but I didn't get a chance to see this book while I was in prison because they censored it, and so I couldn't get it at the prison I was at. And so when I came home, my dad let me borrow his copy. I just haven't returned it to him yet.
Well, that's a rare find. Those are way out of print now, the first volume. So that's a collector's item you've got there.
Yeah.
Could you please tell us a little bit about Righting My Wrongs, the memoir that you wrote while you were inside and that became a pretty big splash after you came home?
Yeah, well, actually, what a lot of people don't know is I actually wrote Righting My Wrongs when I got out of prison. It's the only full body of work that I've written post incarceration. And I had started the idea of like writing about my journey while I was in prison, but I like writing fiction because that just felt more interesting to me. So I was writing detective stories and things like that. And when I got out, I would go do these talks based on my fiction, and people would always say to me, like, you don't seem like someone who's been in prison. And I know they thought of that as a compliment, but I was really offended by it because I met some of the most incredible, super intelligent, really thoughtful men while I was incarcerated who I knew personally could write circles around most people and who were great orators and things of that nature. And so when people would say that to me, I was like, what do they think people in prison are like? Are we just like this monolithic just group of people who are inept and lack, creativity and artistry? And so I just was like, I think people really need to know the backstory of how so many of us end up in prison and the things that we go through that lead us down that path. And so I started writing My Wrongs probably about a year or so after I got out of prison, maybe about 2 years, almost 2 years. And during that time, my son had just been born, so I spent a lot of nights up late with him in one arm and typing with one hand. And I just remember thinking to myself, like, I'm never going to finish this book. But as the word count and page count increased, I was like, oh man, I'm really, getting close to making it to to the finish line. And, the book itself has its own unique journey because I originally self-published it in 2013.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember when I self-published it, I hosted a book signing in Detroit at the Charles H. Wright Museum. And I remember the museum curator saying, this is a pretty big space. We never really have great turnouts for books, but we're willing to rent it to you if that's what you want to do.
That place was packed.
Yeah, it ended up being like 400 people came out, and she was
Yeah.
like, I've never seen anything like this. And what it told me is that people really wanted to know what was going on behind bars. They really wanted to know what was happening with people. And they really wanted to understand, how hope changes the life path of people who are in hopeless situations. And so being able to share, my story at home, that in 2013 was incredible. And so, I ended up just hustling the book and setting it out of the trunk. A model I had learned from rappers. Like I saw rappers who were selling their CDs and everything out of the trunk, and I was like, this is a great business model, especially for people who don't feel like they can go the traditional route and get employment or open up, a brick and mortar. And so I just kept hustling the book everywhere I would go speak. I would make sure I brought copies and, cases. And I was selling a lot of books. And one time I was speaking at this event, and I didn't know much about the event I got invited to, but they ended up sending me a list of people who were going to be there. And I remember opening up the package they sent me and seeing George Lucas, and I was like, holy smokes, this is a real event. This is like George Lucas of Star Wars fame is going to be in the audience. And Melody Hobson, who's is just an incredible financial genius. She's also married to George, their husband and wife. And I was just like, wow, these are incredible people. Because I was reading articles on her while I was in prison. I would read Black Enterprise magazine, and she had a column. So I was like, I got to get her a book. And so I decided to give books away to that audience. And largely because I didn't think they probably was carrying any cash on them. So I was like, get them books. And I didn't have all the fancy technology at the time to accept cards, but one of the women in that room was named Andrea Wisham, who was really a good friend of mine now. But she read the book and she gave the book to Oprah. And I remember Oprah, when Oprah tells the story, she gets the book and she was like, why would I read this? Because the cover was different back then. It was tougher, a little more grittier.
Like this.
And she was like, I don't know why I would read this book, but she eventually decided to read it on her flight from Chicago to LA. And she said she was about 60 pages in when she was like, I got to interview this guy. So that's kind of changed the course of the book.
And so she interviewed you on Super Soul Sunday, right? On that program?
Yeah, so in 2015, summer 2015, she invited me out to her home in LA, in California. Originally, she invited me to her home in Hawaii, but there ended up being a change of plans. So I went to her home in California, and we were supposed to do like a 45-minute interview. It turned into a 3.5-hour conversation that she said was one of the best, not only in her career, but one of the best in her life. And we become friends, which was unexpected for me. I thought, I would do the interview and be able to just have that as one of the many accomplishments and, great stories to tell people. But I didn't anticipate that Oprah and I would literally become friends and, we occasionally talk and text and exchange thoughts and ideas. And she's just been a godsend in a lot of ways. And, that's the magic of being purposeful and being intentional with your art, but also believing that art can change lives. And, without going through the different creative phases I've gone through, I wouldn't have an appreciation for myself as an artist.
Absolutely. And I wanted to show one more of your books that I found on my shelf. You were part of the Detroit Anthology, edited by Anna Clark.
Yeah.
Which is an interesting set of connections for this conversation as well, because Anna Clark was once a student at the University of Michigan and was a facilitator for the Prison Creative Arts Project, doing workshops inside. And she went on to become a pretty famous journalist. She wrote an incredible book about the Flint water crisis and has garnered a lot of national attention for her work and her writing. But one of the cool things that she's done was to put together this wonderful anthology of writings about Detroit. Do you want to say something about the piece that you wrote for this book?
Yeah, so I love that particular book. I have that one on my shelf as well. And what I love about it is it was just so many voices with very different experiences of Detroit. I think the piece I wrote in there is When the Trees No Longer Give Fruit. And it's one of my favorite essays I've written because it goes back to what community really was, and especially now when we're looking at this crisis where people are just not even sure how to even, be in touch with their neighbors because they're afraid of, what's possibly could happen. But that particular piece I wrote was about my remembrance of childhood and having these incredible fruit trees in our backyards. On one side, my neighbors, she had pear trees and she used to make the best pear preserves. And then my other neighbor had like a peach tree, and then we shared a grapevine, and we had a plum tree at one point. And I just remember how that fruit brought us together as a community, when we would come out and share our little mini harvest or whatever we made from it. And, I was really honored when Anna, asked to include me in the book. And the book has done pretty well. I think it's made a couple of bestseller lists of some sort. But it's just cool to be repped in the book about, the city I come from.
Yes, you can live in California all you want, but Michigan's always going to claim you, Shaka.
Yeah, I mean, I think people in California get it by now. They're like, you always have a D hat on. I'm like, yeah, I'm from Detroit. And, I take a great deal of pride in where I come from. And, it's always great to come home. I really wish I could have made this trip. It's really a needed trip. Sometimes, you can move to a different city and things can be wonderful and amazing for the reasons that you're there. But it's just nothing like the connectivity of home and people that you've grown and evolved with. And I was really looking forward to seeing you. A lot of people don't really know our story of just how we connected. You were doing research on PCAP, and when I went to the first PCAP class, like I had been writing for years, and I was at the end of my sentence. Things were kind of winding down for me, and I was like, well, let me just go join these classes and give myself something creative and productive to do. And I went over there and I was just amazed at the students at the time, and just how engaged they were and how serious they took art. Chris and Laura, who were facilitators of the class, and they're just incredible human beings. We've actually become friends, and I keep up with them on social media, and they keep up with me. But what that class and that space offered was really an honest way to share my art with a different audience outside the prison walls. And I always love my the men and who were inside who critique my work early on, because they're really avid readers and they know a lot about literature and culture and a lot more than people would give them credit for. And they're really great critics. They can be very brutal at times, like, yo, this is kind of weak, and but just to have that balanced perspective of being able to share art and create different type of art. I mean, I was doing theater, and I had never thought of like theater as something that I would want to do back then. And I was like, actually, I signed up for the creative writing class, but it was full, and then I just took the theater as default. But it was one of the best choices I made.
Well, we at PCAP will always claim you as one of ours, and we're so grateful for the work that you did. To give a little context to the students or other people watching who may not be familiar with PCAP, we offer courses at the University of Michigan that train students and volunteers from the community to go into a prison or a youth detention facility or a community of people who've come home from prison once a week, and offer an hour and a half to 2 hour workshop in one of several art forms. We work in theater, creative writing, visual art, and most recently in music. And in all of those fields, we do something that lasts for about a semester with a performance at the end. And when I first met Shaka, when I first met you, I was teaching at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill and just visiting Michigan because I thought I wanted to write a book about PCAP. And later on in 2013, I was hired to be the director of PCAP and served in that role for the last 7 years. And I knew that something really special was happening the day that I met you. I walked into this theater workshop in Parr Highway, which is a men's prison in Adrian, and there was this group of exceptionally gifted men. I thought that that workshop was really special, even among the many special PCAP workshops that we've seen. And I didn't know what I was doing. I had never been in spaces like that before I started hanging out at PCAP. And I remember that Shaka kind of grilled me when I walked in the room. You were You were eager to see, like, why is this strange lady who's not supposed to be here coming into this workshop, and what is it all about? And you made me do a couple of monologues from my play about family members of incarcerated people before you were willing to share the work that you all were doing as a workshop. And I always respected you for that, because I felt uh, like you wanted to hold me to a real standard as an artist, because you had those standards for yourself, and that was one of the beautiful things that PCAP's work has taught me in general, is about the incredible, not just the quality of artistry of people inside prisons, but their ability to be, as you mentioned, really good critics and thoughtful consumers of art, people who are responding to art in really beautiful and engaging ways. And
Yeah.
go ahead.
Yeah, no, I mean, one of the things that I always admired though was your willingness to just dive in, and I think that that set such a high bar for the rest of our class time there, because when we would talk post class, the people who were attending really took it serious, and they really realized that art is transformative. And the work that you shared from your one woman show, which I think is just an incredible body of work, was so important. It was so impactful, and it made us feel like, okay, there is a different platform that we can tell stories on that can be meaningful and incredible, and awakens a different part of our artistry. And you just saw that after your sharing how the class really changed and became a lot more serious than I think some of the other classes were. Like, we were very intentional about creating something that had meaning and substance, and not just getting out of our cells blocks into a classroom just to pass time, but really taking it serious. So we really thank you for that level of commitment.
Well, it's been my joy to work alongside you and so many other folks in prison through the Prison Creative Arts Project. And it's also an incredible joy, and something that I think has really transformed our campus in lots of exciting ways, that when you came home, you taught with me for 2 years. Do you want to
Yeah.
talk a little bit about our co-teaching at Michigan?
Yeah, no, it was that's been definitely one of the many highlights, but one of the most personal. I love being an educator, to this day. We started 2013, right? Was it
We
2013?
did. Yeah, right after I got to campus. So the fall of 2013 was our first semester teaching together.
Yeah, so it's coming up on 7 years. And, you know, one of the things that a lot of people don't know is I remember you coming to Michigan, and I was doing this one man monologue show in Michigan, which was just crazy because that came so serendipitous. I did an interview with this woman. I was writing for the newspaper, and she was like, "You have a great voice. You should like be a part of this monologue show." And I was like, "Okay, whatever."
What's
And
the name of that performance space in Detroit where you were? It's an African American
Vir-
cultural center.
yeah, the Virgil Carr Theater. It was like the Virgil Carr downtown.
Hmm.
I hope it's still there. Downtown is changing.
I feel like I still hear things about it. I'm not sure, but I think it's
Yeah,
still there.
it was a really, really cool space. And I remember us talking, and we just was like, we got to work together. Because I think you were just kind of still deciding on taking the job and going through the round of interviews and all
Hmm.
those things. But teaching the class together, um, I think it set a precedence that I hope other people really begin to look at and follow. There's organic intellectuals all over the world, whether it's somebody coming out of incarceration, homelessness, whatever the case may be, there are life experiences that are invaluable to students. And
Hmm.
I think that, you having the courage and just the foresight to say, hey, we should really do this because this is going to help these students in a meaningful way. And then to really just go to the school and say, hey, here's what we're thinking, here's how we want to do it. And, for the administration there to say, let's do it like that, to me, just set a precedent and set the bar so high. Because to me, I think campuses should be just places of not only higher learning, but deeper learning. And I think that the more times we intersect with people who are organic intellectuals, I just think it's a great benefit from the students, and to this day, I see students out and about in the world. I've had students who live here in LA now. They're doing all type of incredible work. Some of them still working in criminal justice. and I get a countless messages from students and social media posts, and they're just like, this class changed my life and changed the way that I see things. So always, the proudest moments for me is anything that impacts young people and help them see the world differently. So it was just a great experience. And like, what was that like for you? Like, I mean, you just dove in and you were new to the school, which is even a whole nother level of courage. It's like, not only are you just starting here, but you're like, hey, let me bring this guy who just got out of prison to come teach a class. Like, what was that experience like for you?
Well, I knew I was in the right place when you actually said to me, hey, you think they would let me teach that class with you? And it was just all these light bulbs went off in my head. And I said, oh my God, that would be the best possible class ever for students who are actually going to be going into prisons to do the PCAP workshops. We definitely need to be talking to people in the outside world, people who've come home, particularly people who did PCAP while they were inside. That was just a whole other level of insight that neither I nor even the people currently in prison could offer to our students. Because when we're in prison and doing the work, there's no time to stop and talk about it. And there's also the sense of the prison around you and everybody listening and staff, and you can't be as honest and forthright about what the experience of being in that work together is all about. So to have you there to talk to our students um, was a pedagogical miracle, really. It radically changed the way that I teach everything. And since our time teaching together, I've been committed whenever possible, whenever we could dig up the money to make it work, to having a formerly incarcerated person co-teach all of my PCAP classes with me. So after you taught with me, the wonderful Mary Heinen McPherson, who is now on permanent staff at PCAP, was my co-instructor. And in recent years, Cosine Welch, who was, until his release, the most published poet in the Michigan Review of Prisoner Creative Writing. He's been teaching with me.
No, that's incredible. When I remember when Cosine reached out to me, I was just like, man, like, we made it happen. Like, we really changed the culture, and now it's the norm, and so I actually look forward to like rejoining you at some point. With all this modern technology, I feel like we can still teach a class together, so we should figure that out.
I would love that. I would
Maybe
absolutely
a
love that.
semester or something. But I think that would be great.
I think so too. And I have to say that I also really admire Priscilla Lindsey, who is still the chair of theater and drama, because when I said to her, hey, there's this guy who just did 19 years in Michigan prison who kind of wants to teach a class with me. How do you feel about that? And by the way, we're in the theater department, but the class won't be all about theater because it's actually about how different kinds of art enter the restorative justice process. And we're going to call it the Atonement Project. And Priscilla didn't bat an eyelash. She said, can you get me a copy of his book? And that level of trust and support and a willingness to embrace not just you, but a community of formerly incarcerated people is one of the things for me that's been most exciting and transformative about being able to be a professor at this university in connection with the Prison Creative Arts Project.
Yeah, what's incredible about Priscilla is like that happened before the book became like a big deal. Like, I had just released the book.
Yeah, no, we went out to the trunk of your car and got a bunch of those self-published books and brought them in the classroom and asked the students for $20 a book.
And the students still love that version, which is always great. So,
somebody stole one from my office. I don't know who it was, but I have to I need to get the other one that I have of the original.
I'll let people see what
the old cover was cool. The new cover is nice too. If you can show them both, they can see the contrast.
This was the original Right My Wrongs.
Yeah. And then, I knew you and I were going to be friends forever when I saw that your really tough looking tattoos had to do with writing.
I know, right? Definitely had to keep the writing in there. And then this is the current copy. This is the one I guess I travel with whenever I'm traveling and speaking. I've had this dog-eared copy for a while. But now it's a New York Times bestseller, and it's the book is just incredible. Like, it's embedded in a lot of universities, so a lot of professors are using it as part of their class, and high schools all over the nation have accepted the book and adopted it as part of their class. So it's really just a gift that keeps on giving in that way. I'm actually excited. I don't know. I kind of have mixed feelings because I have a new book that I'm working on now, and it's a departure from this space. It's more about like where I'm at this point in my life as a father, as a man, as a Black man in America. With two sons, one who I had an opportunity to raise, one who I didn't, navigating the complexities of that. So I'm excited about that, and really getting that. But this is my baby. Righting My Wrongs has been such a, impactful part of my life that, it's my baby. So I don't know how I feel when a new baby arrives, but, I'm gonna figure out how to keep them connected and nurture them both the same.
Well, I think it's like your real children. You love them equally. It's just they're different. They're very different. Can
Yeah.
you tell us a little bit about your play before we let you go?
Yeah, so I'm really excited. So after I did the monologue show in Detroit, it was really interesting because I was the least experienced person on the stage, and but people had a really great response to that. And so when I put Righting My Wrongs out, one of the things, and I do want to share this with students, because I think this is important for them to know. When I was on tour in 2016, like the mainstream tour, so it was an incredible tour. I started in, I think, DC and Chicago and New York and LA, and I ended it in Detroit. But it was incredible. I'm meeting the stars, and it's all the bells and whistles that come with being on a mainstream bookstore. I think I was on Comedy Central with Trevor Noah. I did Oprah. I was on CBS This Morning. Pretty much every platform you could think of. CNN. I did multiple shows there. But during that stretch, I remember getting depressed. And what I realized is I was dredging up so much of my trauma to tell the story. And I didn't have space or time to really unpack the feelings or emotions to it. And so that got my wheels spinning about my work in criminal justice in general, and I've done this work for a long. I was doing this work before I ever got out of prison. I was getting in trouble for writing grievances for people and standing up for myself, and ended up in solitary confinement and just all these different things. So, I've been doing this stuff for almost 30 years now at this point. And I was going through this moment on tour. I was in New York. I had did like 16 interviews in about 3 days. And I remember the last interview, I was being kind of short with the journalist. Like, she hadn't read the book. She wasn't really, she didn't have a great deal of experience. And I was just tired. I was exhausted. I was being really short with her. And then I just paused and I gathered myself, took a deep breath, and I helped us get through the interview. Having journalistic skills, I just kind of reframed everything for her so she can get her story. But I went back and questioned myself, like, why was I feeling like that? And I just realized, like, that trauma of telling your worst moment over and over had just caught up with me. And so I started thinking about, okay, what is the path forward? Once I get done with the book and it does with its own thing, and it goes to this 90-day thing, and I'm just done with it, and I'll move on to something different. Of course, literally 4 years later, the book is still just, selling at the same rate. So there's that part. But what I realized is that there were different stories I wanted to tell about my experience and the experience of the men and women who have been through the system in a way that wasn't harmful to me personally, that wasn't just really about my personal trauma, but more about my observations and just the creative side of me. So I started working on this play, this monologue show called The Cell. And it was really just about a character, a group of characters who all had different experiences with the judicial system. There was a young guy who was convicted as a teenager. There was, older gentleman who was wrongfully convicted, and just, a mixture of people. And I remember getting introduced to the Geffen Playhouse in LA. And, I went to have a meeting with them. I told them kind of what I wanted to work on, and they was like, we don't really know about it. It sounds interesting. I was like, well, can I read something? And they allowed me to read like part of the monologue. And then they offered me the largest commission that they've ever offered a playwright in their history, after like literally just one paragraph. So I was excited about that. So
You
we're
do
still,
have that effect on people.
yeah, we're still building that one out. I ended up partnering with another playwright named Daniel Beatty, who's really incredible, writer, performer. And so we started building that out. We've been kind of working it over the last couple of years. And then I got this idea to do a one-man show And largely because I just got tired of telling my story, and I was just like, how can I do this creatively? How can I do it in a way that really encapsulates my full experience? Most people, they want to talk about the book. I finished that book, writing that book in 2013. A lot of life has happened since then. I'm coming up on 10 years of freedom in June. Um,
Congratulations.
Thank you so much. And so I just realized, like, a lot of people know mainstream Shaka, and they know the Oprahs and all those fancy things, which is great, and TED Talks and all those things, which is it's great, because it creates a different type of conversation. But they don't know the process, Shaka. They don't know the selling books out the trunk, the self-publishing, overcoming the obstacles, all the things I faced with discrimination in housing and employment, and all the different things. And I was like, okay, how do I tell that story? Because I just feel like at this point in my life, it's more interesting to me. Like, what I've done post incarceration is far more interesting. I mean, there's a lot of people who have stories of their incarceration, but I think it's rare to have this level of success, just in general. But then to have this level of success post incarceration, I felt people would be more interested in the process and the practices and kind of the principles around how I navigate the world. And I also wanted, what happens when I do keynotes, people are like, oh my God, I didn't know you were so funny, because they really think I'm serious all the time. It's like a serious subject. But I'm far less serious than the subject is. And so I ended up writing this one-man show called One Love, Letters from Solitude. And it's kind of told through my journal to myself, and just kind of me sharing that in a very intimate way with people, and bringing in kind of letters that impacted my life, from like my father, and my relationship with my ex, girlfriend, and how that brought this beautiful child into the world. And then it just gets into, my dreams coming true. Like, a lot of people don't realize that I wrote down what I wanted to happen in my life. When I started journaling, I was very intentional, very clear. Like, this is what I want to do when I get out of prison. This is what I want to evolve into as an artist, as a voice of the community, as a mentor, as a father. And so you get all of that wrapped up into this very funny, really insightful, really vulnerable body of work that I'm working on. And I'm looking forward to bringing it to Michigan in some capacity. We haven't quite figured out what that looks like. But I'm always investing in myself. I'm always betting on myself. I don't kind of wait for the system to give me permission to create art. I think if you're an artist, you just create it, and you'll figure out a pathway to get it out to the world. But the most important thing is to not wait for somebody else to validate you, just to create, and to honor the creativity of others. I know we have students who will be watching this, who possibly will be part of PCAP and going into class, going into prisons. And people always ask me, like, what do you do? And I'm like, the best gift you can bring inside a prison is your humanity, and recognize that, these artists are either there for one or two reasons. One, they're really good and they want to share it with others, or two, they're really excited to learn about how to become, a good artist or a great artist, potentially. And so, for the students tuning in, I really want them to grasp onto that reality of smuggling your humanity in. It's a very tough environment to work in, but it's one of the most rewarding, because the people who make a real commitment to being artists, like, their work ethic, their insights, their knowledge is just invaluable, add to the larger society. So I look forward to hearing what happens next semester, and hopefully the students have a great experience of going inside.
I'm sure they will. We're feeling like the work is more urgent than ever right now because of the quarantines, and all of the Michigan prisons have shut out all volunteers right now, which I think is the right thing to do given
Yeah.
the risk of infection. But that meant that all the PCAP workshops this semester could not be completed. So I know there are a lot of folks who sort of felt like they were midway through that breath of what the workshop was meant to be, and we're just going to start it all again in the fall and take as much of that joy and humanity and life back inside with us, and receive all the beautiful artistic energy that those folks have.
Yeah, absolutely. It always, hurts when the classes get disrupted, because I know a lot of times the students can't get back another semester.
Yeah.
they move on to other things. But I hope that whatever they got so far is beneficial and helpful, and they can always follow my work and the work of many other formerly incarcerated people who are doing incredible work around the world. I mean, there's comedians out here, writers and visual artists who are doing just some incredible work, and just continue to elevate the conversation around the impact that art has on that environment will be really invaluable for them.
Well, we'll keep trying, and we are so grateful for all of your willingness to give of yourself and collaborate with us, and to always remember us at the University of Michigan and at PCAP.
Yeah, no, I'm excited. I'm excited to come home. So hopefully we'll be able to make it happen in the fall, and we'll be able to connect. And I was so excited to come do the lecture. It's like going back and forth and waiting those moments. So when all this stuff happened, it was really disappointing because home is home, and I love the campus. I love teaching. I love seeing how PCAP continues to evolve and continues to create the best art possible, create the best space for artists possible. And of course, I love meeting the new students. So looking forward to this fall, and even the ones who may not be in the PCAP class in the fall semester, hopefully they can come out and hear the conversation, and it'll be fun, and we'll have a great time.
Well, before we sign off, can you tell the students who are watching where they can go online to find out more information about your work?
Yeah, I mean, I'm super easy to find at this point. All of my social media is consistent as Shaka Senghor. So the spelling is right here, if you can see it. So yeah, you can find me on any social media under that. Then my website is also shakasenghor.com. So it's pretty easy to find me. Yeah, and don't hesitate to reach out. I mentor. I'm working on creating a mentoring platform because I mentor like a lot of students just through social media. They'll reach out with questions and things like that. So I want to create a more intentional platform for them to intersect with, the world that I've created for myself, and hopefully we can do that soon.
Well, that's wonderful. And for those of you watching who want more information about the Prison Creative Arts Project, you can find it at www.prisonarts.org. And if you want to take PCAP classes in the fall, there will be plenty of them. Some of them might send you into prison and others might not. Contact us and see the website for more options. Thank you all so much for tuning in, and we look forward to an in-person Penny Stamps lecture with Shaka Senghor in future if we can make it happen.
Yep, coming soon.